It's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you.
The Batman is perfect, but saying that out loud makes it feel like an oversimplification, because what we are treated to by Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson respectively is nothing but poetic. An amalgamation of care and deliberation taken upon by people who love the character and the world that revolves around him just as much as you and I. A perfect storm, some may say. And at the very helm, steering the ship, is Matt Reeves. There are very few filmmakers that match both his tenacity and ambition. His relentless love for every one of his projects, particularly War and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, to name a few, both idealizes what it truly means to create a work of art. And the Batman is no different. Now, there are many things to love about the Batman. Robert Pattinson's portrayal is unlike anything I've seen in a very long time, especially in a comic book film setting. In my opinion, he has done for Batman what Robert Downey Jr. accomplished as Iron Man in 2008.
What? I require healing.
He truly made Batman his own. The film itself relies heavily on his performance, as the runtime of the film is 2 hours and 47 minutes, or 167 minutes precisely, of which 129 minutes is devoted to the Batman and Bruce Wayne, followed by Jim Gordon at 51 minutes and accompanied by Selina Kyle at 49. It's important to note that the central antagonist, the Riddler, sits at a surprising 22 minutes, but more on him later. It is also noteworthy to understand that the dictating factor of the film hinges on how well Robert can make us feel the emotional fragility of Batman and Bruce. To be exact, Bruce is only seen in 4 scenes, but in this case, less is definitely more, because what we do see of him lends itself perfectly to the story that is unraveling before us. A perfect technique to convey such an effect is to simply show, don't tell. And by doing so, you allow the audience to take information in naturally, henceforth allowing them to be captivated by the story itself.
That's interesting.
Submerging us further into the dark underbelly of Gotham, as opposed to overstepping and exposing the mystique of the film and the message. This is thematically and visually accomplished in many ways. Matt Reeves at no point allows himself to relinquish his control over the camera. He allows us to take a peek behind the mask only when needed and when necessary. It happens just enough to see through the facade that is Batman. And by doing so, you get a glimpse into uncovering the fact that he is still that very same kid who lost both a part of his soul and his parents to an unforgiving alleyway. And you truly feel it when unmasking the eyes of Bruce Wayne. Unlike past Batman movies, we didn't have to sit through yet another montage depicting the origin of our fabled hero, because in the end, we are somewhat guided to feel everything that is consuming him at the very core of his character. To illustrate that very notion, we see Bruce looking at a kid who lost his dad, very much like himself, then followed by an abrupt pause, a feeling of hopelessness, overridden by an unsympathetic lust for vengeance towards a city that has caused so much pain and suffering, and that uncontrollable rage is on full display every time the lights go out.
I'm vengeance.
Now this is great filmmaking, because it accomplishes what past montages aim to do, but at the same time, it is successful in progressing the narrative, allowing us to both engage with and emphasize the moral compass behind Bruce. In effect, hinting at Bruce Wayne and the burden that he carries, showcasing firsthand why he chooses to fight corruption in order to stop things like this from happening again. We gather all of this information simply by analyzing his eyes.
Look at me.
It tells us everything we need to know, being able to convey an esteemed emotion, that of sadness and rage, with such nuance. That is acting at its very best. In comparison, I believe this very scene and the way it is constructed eclipses the montage showcased at the beginning of Batman vs Superman, for example, on the basis that it is much more effective in demonstrating how Gotham City has a direct impact on Bruce and his ideology, which at the time is heavily centralized around the idea of vengeance. And in addition, the scene manages to also symbolize Batman and his origin in a more profound manner. It has functionality and purpose. It is concise in how it chooses to elaborate and hint upon Bruce and his past, and in conjunction gives us a reason for his relentless ambition and the need to be better. And by doing so, it is successful in improving upon the formula as opposed to being just a repetitive spectacle. This scene is perfect as it conveys so many messages but manages to retain simplicity, and that is hard to come by nowadays. This is not the only time we get to resonate with him as a character. Matt Reeves and Peter Craig, who wrote the screenplay, made it so that Batman himself, though complex at first glance, evidently display traits that very much humanize him, making him more relatable to both you and I. And it doesn't get any more human than drawing an element of Batman from Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana. Matt and his interpretation of the Batman is evidently unhinged. The artistic choice behind choosing Nirvana, and more definitively, the Nevermind album, is a testament to that very concept, with music tracks such as Polly alluding to a fractured state of mind, focusing on an unstable individual who is tantalized by the act of bodily harm. The album inspired Matt greatly. Listening to Something in the Way resonated with him to a large extent, so much so that the song was used heavily to market the film to both establish and convey the tone that he wished to set, right from the get-go. The track is used throughout the film for that very same reason. Something in the Way got him thinking about how he as a director could galvanize Bruce Wayne as a character to be more like the 90s rock icon. The structure of the song may be perceived as monotonous, but only through repetition does it unveil the idea of Bruce being stuck in an everlasting predicament. A perfect analogy is a mythic story, that of Sisyphus. Zeus punishes him for a wide variety of reasons, of which differ from telling to telling, although the most famous narrative goes as follows. Sisyphus defies death twice, thereby aggravating Zeus in the process, leading to his inevitable demise. He is tormented eternally for not facing his trepidation with the task of rolling a massive stone up a hill, woefully having to restart every time he reaches the peak. I believe the story is interconnected with Bruce in a very unique way, as he resides in seclusion for the most part, unable to internalize pain without it creating the immersive feeling of frustration within him. He has a need to be better, but has a hard time supplementing his self-consciousness in a proficient manner. The environment that he has been imprisoned to plays a massive hand in the fact that the city is his limitation, continuously suppressing the Batman and rejecting his ideology, somewhat even restraining his full potential, hindering him further by awakening a level of self-doubt, hampering his belief in civilization and justice. By creating such a stark conflict within him, I believe Nirvana perfectly shadows as a harbinger of self-healing. The music, like Batman and his hope for a better tomorrow, has a vivid contrast. The reoccurring theme of anguish and confusion is layered with an angelic voice, that of Kurt Cobain. Rather than make Bruce Wayne the Playboy version we've seen before, there's another version, who had gone through a great tragedy and become a recluse, and that is why the human element of Batman clearly defines the film. I felt nothing but compassion when Batman believed he was going to be exposed by the Riddler. Fear, distress, and anxiety visibly begin to creep in. You can sense the discomfort that he's in. His breathing begins to get heavy and inconsistent. The perception of Batman begins to dissipate, as everything around him starts to fracture.
Maybe this is all coming to an end. What is? The Batman.
His identity is at stake, and along with that, the very conception of Batman may cease to even exist. Yet even at his lowest predicament thus far, he chose to be affectionate. You're a good cop. This is a moment that personifies the human side of Batman with perfection. Even if he was going to be exposed, he wanted Jim Gordon to know that he respected and had faith in him, bearing in mind that Gotham isn't exactly known for its affection. It is a small act of kindness, but in itself has so much emotion and meaning behind it. At this point, you begin to see a different side to Batman, which begins to surface even more so when he interacts with Catwoman. His insatiable need to protect her is at the very forefront. He goes out of his way to try to help her, and when on screen together, you can tell that she is having a positive impact on his life. As throughout the film, they become more intimate. This is personified when they are seen playing cat and mouse, up until the very last shot where he chooses to look back at Catwoman. I believe this is a defining moment for him as a character. It is a meaningful indication that foreshadows the fact that she gave him the gift of hope, for there to one day be a better tomorrow, when they meet once again, overriding any sense of doubt. To add to that, an emotion the film consolidates as it progresses is the evident theme of fear. We see two sides of the same coin on many occasions. To begin with, Batman weaponizes fear. It's his greatest asset. He breaks down petty thugs without breaking a sweat, and occasionally just by looking at them.
Something wrong? Nope.
But the Batman takes the concept of fear to new heights, both figuratively and literally. The illuminated projection of the Batman seen at the very beginning of the film sets a clear precedent, thematically speaking, as it demonstrates the psychological effect Batman has on his enemies, as they begin to immediately run away and hide at the very thought of him. This amplifies a sense of realism in Gotham as it elaborates upon the city and the control the Batman possesses, in doing so making Gotham itself a living, breathing character, so to speak. An example is that the aesthetic of Gotham interchanges depending on Batman and a change in mindset. Subsequently, we can see a sunset emerging in the third act of the film, notably in a film that has predominantly been rendered obsolete by sheer darkness up until that very point. I view this as a homage to Harvey Dent, who states, "The night is darkest just before dawn, and I promise you, the dawn is coming," poetically signifying a rebirth. Now comparatively, the beginning of the Batman signifies the concept of fear in a way that has never been implemented before. In the first act of the film, in particular, Batman's opening monologue further establishes the inner workings of his psychology.
When that light hits the sky, it's not just a call, it's a warning to them. Fear is a tool. They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows.
From this passage alone, it is apparent that this Batman is unlike anything we have seen before. He lacks self-control and is clearly emotionally driven. At this point in time, Batman has only been operating for 2 years. The film itself is inspired massively by Mike W. Barr and his work on Batman Year 2. It is a thin disguise, but very much like Mike's adaptation, Batman is quite evidently hindered by frustration. He doesn't feel like he's doing enough, and that concept has taken a significant toll on his psyche. I wish I could say I'm making a difference, but I don't know. This is the first connotation that leads us to believe that he is self-loathing in doubt, and doubt is undeniably interlinked with the fear of the unknown, usually then snowballing into an unsustainable need for control. This is accomplished by exposing both Batman and Bruce to fear in a variety of ways. The fear of losing Alfred, notably the only father figure that remains in his life who also happens to have a connection with his past, mainly his parents, which allows him to keep some positive memories intact and preserved, which even more significantly, in some way, keeps his parents alive. Now losing Alfred would have a profound effect on Bruce. It most certainly would ravage upon all the happiness that he still has left in him. and replace it with nothing but hatred if that connection is to ever be severed. And thus, the fear of losing someone as close as Alfred was met with complete urgency. But in the end, he is left powerless, sitting beside a defeated Alfred, knowing that he is only alive because luck was on his side. And if there was ever to be a next time, he may not be as lucky. Followed by the fear of not being enough, constantly being tormented in his everyday life, when trying to seek out a revelation in a city that knows nothing but pain and dread, causing him to be consumed by severe anxiety, and occasionally inflicting a sudden outburst. Even a childlike fear of heights being portrayed, making it so that we can gravitate towards him as a character, as many of us may have that very same fear. To be more specific, recent studies would suggest that 3 to 6% of the human populace suffer with acrophobia, more commonly known as, you guessed it, a fear of heights. The look of panic shows us everything we need to know about him as a character, which relates back to the idea of Batman being nothing but a facade. The very act of crash landing in itself is poetic in a way that it shows him being evidently flawed. He is far from perfect, as opposed to the parallel of Christian Bale's version of Batman, who can be seen gliding with elegance throughout his trilogy, a copious amount of times. And this comparison in itself clearly demonstrates the fact that they are both in completely different stages in life. The Batman being subjugated to the emotion of fear is a prerequisite, very much like past renditions of the character, which culminates in the Batman finally overcoming his fear in the third act of the film. This is a typical trope seen in a Batman movie. For example, Batman finally defeating Bane in the ending of The Dark Knight Rises can be seen as comic retribution after having been left physically incapacitated and mentally broken. But what I find to be surprising in that case specifically is that as time has passed us by, and for all its gravitas and magnetism, many fans of Christopher Nolan and the Dark Knight trilogy felt that the conclusion was somewhat underwhelming. There can be many reasons as to why someone may feel this way or the adverse. But as for the Batman, it chose to delve into the deepest recesses of Bruce Wayne's psyche, in a sense attempting to humanize a vengeful demon of the night, who happens to be clouded by his own intuition. Put simply, he is a prisoner to his own mind. He's become obsessive to the point where he has seemingly become nocturnal.
2 years of nights turned me into a nocturnal animal.
Bruce Wayne is simply an afterthought. He is no longer obligatory. He's addicted to being Batman and Batman alone, scouring through his lens captures every night, documenting every event in his journal so he can simply keep track of time.
Sometimes, in the morning, I have to force myself to remember.
He has become so obsessive to the point that time itself has become an illusion.
See, that wasn't so hard.
An intangible constraint that he doesn't allow to hold him back. The darkness itself resonates with him. He gets lost in it, and because of it, he is somewhat detached from reality. You can feel the strain it has on him. He is conflicted. He wants to be better, but he doesn't know how to. The human aspect of seeing him fight to be a better version of himself makes it so that we can resonate with him in a more personal way. Batman throughout the film is fixated on the idea of vengeance, and by doing so, he unknowingly deviates into the wrong path. The lack of control made it so that the Riddler, otherwise known as Edward Nygma, reimagined as Edward Nashton in The Batman, was given free rein to intrinsically manipulate his surroundings to coerce Batman into a state of confusion. The murders that occur throughout the film, though as sadistic as they may be, they have one main purpose, and that is to get one step closer to the Batman himself. Ashton has a peculiar obsession with our protagonist, as characters such as the Penguin and Carmine Falcone have no real underlying effect on Bruce, whereas Edward psychologically challenges Batman and more significantly, his ideology. From start to finish, we see a very systematic side to Batman when it comes to Edward. He is efficient in solving cases and anomalies at a crime scene. Establishing the detective prowess of Batman with the utmost of precision was paramount because it works hand in hand with the antagonist. And finally, uncovering his hidden agenda. With only 22 minutes of screen time, Edward successfully traversed the tainted concept of Batman thus far with great effect every step of the way. And as vindictive as he may be in how he tortures a victim, he is almost seen to be in a trance-like state, consumed by resentment. The reoccurring theme of a troubled past is at the forefront once again as he radiates anger due to a lack of fairness in his life. Both Edward and Bruce were raised as orphans, but the similarities somewhat end there. Bruce received all the delicacies in life and was raised comfortably in the loving care of Alfred up in Wayne Tower, whereas Edward was unfortunately dealt an even worse hand after losing his father, as he felt imprisoned, left to simply decay in a run-down care home for most of his life, and is now mentally disturbed yet empowered by the concept of vengeance, as he was never granted a real sense of stability and care. Edward is quite clearly a product of his own environment. Therefore, there is a clear focus on his indignation towards Bruce and his father, Thomas.
And Gotham needs you to answer for the sins of your father.
As he is led to believe that they are both unjust. The level of intellect that he exemplifies is met with an air of despondency, as he couldn't make the correlation between Bruce and Batman, characterizing yet again how rage can cloud your judgment and intuition. In the same way, it made Bruce question his father's legacy and legitimacy. That aside, Edward is a worthy adversary to the Batman, as they are notably one and the same. They both have an unmitigated desire to be the embodiment of vengeance. Edward himself can be assessed as a dark reflection of what the Batman is to become if he chooses to stay on this path. But he soon faces a revelation that instinctively changes everything. In the final act of the film, Batman comes across a disillusioned disciple of Edward who says,
I'm vengeance.
Which word for word is very reminiscent of Batman and his ideology, and it is at this given moment where everything comes crashing down on Batman. He finally sees everything clearly, for the first time. The smoke screen begins to clear as his state of mind begins to shift and succumb to a point of equilibrium. Batman unknowingly created the Riddler, very much so because of his lack of control. Edward is a combination of Batman and his obsessive need for vengeance. The anger and destructive nature that he displays caused a significant rift in his character, which made Edward look up to him and was heavily inspired by the very worst aspects of Batman.
If only you knew how long I've been waiting for this day, for this moment.
Then corresponding into him taking matters into his own hands by killing those who caused corruption. This specifically is where the two deviate from one another drastically, as Batman, though bounded by a clear purpose to protect through whatever means necessary, lives by a code, and that is to not ever take life. He has a clear sense of conviction set in place, but in the end, created a monster who counteracts the preservation of life, nonetheless demonstrating how the actions of one man can bring out the very worst in someone else. The journey that he undertakes as a hero is very profound, as it highlights how by wanting to stand for something good, you can soon find yourself to be lost, and it was imperative for him as a character to see through the mistake that he had made, and then adapt. Vengeance doesn't cure trauma. The very same way vengeance doesn't heal wounds, it contaminates them. Revenge, in the end, accomplishes nothing. It functions as a way to incapacitate as opposed to protect, and the Batman now understands that he has to stand for something more. He has to believe in justice.
Justice. Huh? The answer's justice.
This is reiterated when Batman says,
Vengeance won't change the past, mine or anyone else's. I have to become more. People need hope to know someone is out there for them.
He now latched on to a progressive mindset. By letting go of his personal vendetta against Gotham, he found a new purpose that can lead to a positive change. This is a turning point for him as a man, a chance for him to be a beacon of light in a city clouded by darkness. It is illustrated to perfection when the Batman is seen guiding the innocent towards the light, juxtaposed with the red beaming flare connotating that even up until this point, he can still be seen as a threat. But the moment that cements the journey the Batman has been on is when those who may have brandished him to be a demon of the night at one point in time now find themselves holding on to him for hope and safety, embracing him for who he really is. The character arc is supplemented by the reincarnation of Hope. This very moment breaks a barrier in which Batman was restrained to. He is now more than just a vigilante. Batman is standing in front of us, but we can't help but see Bruce. Not so long ago, he had nothing to stand for, left demoralized by a seemingly endless void of agony, left stranded for so long, hounded by negative emotions, unable to wake up from the hellish nightmare, with no end in sight. But now, he stands in front of us, reborn and wide awake, to symbolize the fact that pain was constructed for us to one day overcome, and to remind us to survive.